First of all, thanks to everyone for joining us for this session. We're really happy to be here to talk with you about this particular topic. So today we're going to be talking about data privacy and key practices that increase awareness and reduce risk. It's really important when we're talking about data privacy for people not to get completely overwhelmed. As you know, this is a big topic, it's a big issue. It's something that's had a lot of regulatory interest over the past few years. And I feel like some companies feel as though data privacy is like boiling the ocean. But the purpose of this session is to go over kind of 3 high-level things that any company can do right now that are actionable, that can help them increase awareness and reduce risk. So before we start into some of the questions or the 3 things we want to talk about, I would love for Scott to introduce himself.
Sure, Debbie, thanks. And hopefully we get Katrina in here in a second too. I apologize for background noise, but such is the work from home these days. So bear with me as you might hear some dogs and people in the background. But my name's Scott Gallant. I represent a company organization called Keat Systems. I also work with a nonprofit called the Education Security and Privacy Exchange, sit on numerous industry standards, data standards organizations relative to education, but have found my way into numerous NIST groups and IEEE groups, et cetera, working on standards both globally and domestically here in the US. Currently engaged in COVID response programs, both for education, but for a lot of sovereign nations, are on doing some very privacy evasive stuff, actually. Contact tracing, quarantine, monitoring with wristbands and things of the like. So having a blast trying to guide organizations and governments down those paths as a privacy expert. So yeah, I got my hands on a lot of things, a little bit of a jack of all trades, but I've already found this cybersecurity symposium very enriching, listening to others.
Excellent. And I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Debbie Reynolds. I'm the CEO and Chief Data Privacy Officer of Debbie Reynolds Consulting. I work with companies to help them be able to expand and also remove barriers to adoption when they're working on multinational issues. A lot of my clients work in emerging technologies, and I help a lot with companies that are working on things like virtual reality, things like contact tracing all over the world. So this is a great topic of discussion. It's something I feel that can help any type of company, regardless of what level they are in privacy. And because privacy, in my opinion, it should be as common as air. So at some point, this is going to touch every type of company. So being able to talk about it in these high-level actionable ways, I think will be very helpful and beneficial to people. All right. So we still don't yet have Katrina. I hope she'll be able to join us here. Scott, why don't we start out with data minimization? I'll kind of talk about this at a high level. Data minimization is very important because a lot of companies have had the experience over the years to collect probably more data than they should, or to keep more data than they should. And a part of complying with data privacy regulations across the board, especially if you're dealing with consumer or individual data, is to be able to find ways to only collect what you need. So this, to me, is sort of harkens back to the types of messages that people were getting many years ago about information governance. So, you know, having a good governance program within your company definitely helps, but also reevaluating why you have data and why you need it, and then being able to find ways to minimize and only collect what you need so that you have a purpose that can be recorded. Scott, what are your thoughts?
There's a lot packed into working through data minimization. We have very short time today. So I think if you were to try to articulate the top 10 or top 20 different domains of privacy and even level in some security, data minimization is certainly going to be one of them, but there's a number of others. So we might be able to touch on 3 or 4 with data minimization as the topic. But we'll see that as a core principle in most all privacy frameworks or privacy principles that are out there. And it's a great one, right? Because it does challenge you to address why are we collecting data? That's fundamentally what it's about. And you know, I will ask, actually, for those that are listening, I know that there's a lot of privacy and security experts out there that I'm learning from today there are also people that are maybe at a different degree of maturity with their privacy programs looking to learn. So maybe just on a 1 to 10 scale, throw out, like, if 10, you're an industry expert running the show for the world, and 1, hey, I'm here to just start learning and at a maturity level where I just need to sort of pick up some tips just to help us guide a little bit more as we go forward. That would be great. But to harp in on the 3 points, Katrina, Debbie, that you have up there, purpose of the data collected, right? I think that's fundamental in understanding what we're offering as a government or as a business as well. And so that purpose needs to be refined. And the one that I see a lot get overused is for research purposes or for product efficacy, right? Because it kind of seems to be a catch-all that people have used for years to try to leverage data for additional uses outside the bounds. So I think we're going to start to see those purposes be a little bit more refined in nature. And as we get to more automated governance and control processing, we can actually codify those purposes in such a way that we can classify them and put meta around them to automate allowing access to data for a purpose that's very much outside the one-liner that's in your contracts and scope of works. So I think that's kind of one of the keys that I'd say is one of the focuses I focus on with clients and customers.
Yeah, I also say data minimization is one I like to focus on because that's the one that you can probably do or tackle before you even, let's say you buy a software program. Some of this housekeeping can be done probably, obviously it takes a level of effort, but some of this can be done without kind of spending a massive amount of money up front, at least to start, to kind of rethink why you're collecting things. You know, I think especially because data is so prevalent within companies, I think companies have had the idea that they just need to collect everything. So being able to kind of think through that, especially as it relates to privacy and as it relates to how you collect customer data, is pretty important. Data retention policies, these are things that should be important anyway within the business, not just related to privacy. So those things are important as well. And then on a forward-going basis, really have a plan about what data you're going to collect and why it's important. All right, Scott, we're going to go to the next topic.
Well, sure. How are we pacing? We have only 3 topics to discuss. We'll certainly field some questions. We can harp on that one a little bit longer if you'd like. There are some things that we could talk about with respect to minimization from the retention side of the house, right? A lot of the legacy systems that are out there didn't have good purge or deletion processes built into them, right? So we might use that information for something in the future, or our research and our analytics team know there's going to be value someday. Hey, look who's here, Katrina! Nice to see you.
Excellent.
Yeah. So those retention principles sort of guide a lot with respect to how architecture and infrastructure is going to work. And as we get into this world where there are more tangent points into sideline systems and you're not necessarily pulling your own data and you're leveraging data on the fly with APIs and other designs, we still have to ask the question of minimization, right? So where we're using federated and distributed mechanisms to reach into other places to showcase data live, but we're not storing it, we still need to ask that question about purposeful use and intent. It's not always about what you collect and store and the fact that it's sitting in state in your own governed systems. It's also about how you decide to use that data on the fly while tapping other systems. I think that's something that's often forgotten.
So since we have Katrina here, so happy to see her. We love for her to introduce herself. And actually, if you could, Katrina, maybe give us a little bit of your insight on data minimization.
Sure, with pleasure. So hi, everyone. My name is Katrina Destre. I'm based here in California. I'm the Director of Privacy with Kuma, a boutique consulting firm focused exclusively on privacy and security. Kuma provides a wide range of services to both public sector organizations and private sector firms. And my focus is on operationalizing privacy programs. So for example, I work directly with product owners when launching new products, services, and features of those products. And together we perform privacy impact assessments. I also respond to data subject access requests and partner inquiries. And prior to Kuma, I worked in Europe for about 20 years. I held management positions in sustainability in the telecom sector. I worked mostly in Brussels, but also Amsterdam, Paris, and Warsaw. So I have kind of a unique combination of working in 2 different environments. In Europe, very policy focused, and here in California, very tactical, hands-on, implementing privacy by design from the very beginning. So thinking about data minimization, that's actually the first question when we think about performing a privacy impact assessment. The first part is recognizing personal data. Do you need it? And why do you need it? And to make sure that it's collected, processed for a specific purpose. It's different than it used to be a few years ago, very recently, even until a few years ago, that you could have all the data just in case, that it might be useful one day. Now the view has changed. Only process what you need for a reason, because too much can be a liability. If you have too much, you're not using it, get rid of it. So that's the first part, data minimization. It is, as it sounds, to minimize. It also impacts the quality, separating good data from bad data. Stale data is a liability, exposure, and also efficacy for purposes of audit. Just imagine too much data, you've got more to go through. So data minimization is really key. Less is more in this case.
Very good. So, Katrina, we're going to go to feasible data management. So this is a point that you brought up, and I would love for you to start on this to bring this part of the session.
Well, bring it back to our topic today about smart cities. There's so much potential in smart cities. And I actually started looking at smart cities back in 2008 while in Europe. So while smart cities can be relatively newer in the US, in Europe, we were really looking at smart cities, especially for low-lying areas. And there's so much potential, so much, particularly in the ICT sector with sensors. So here you are in the midst of a lot of opportunity to gather a lot of data, have a lot of insights. Some of that can be personal data. So in looking at how you're going to approach this topic of privacy and security, thinking about what's reasonable, what's sustainable, because this is not something that's a one-off. It's going to be a way of doing business for the long term. So you want to think about it in advance so that you can plan a course of action that really minimizes your risks. And think about that word sustainability. A lot of people think, okay, it's the green aspect and reducing carbon emissions, which is one angle, but another angle is a sustainable business model. So looking at how you're processing data, how you can track that data in a reasonable fashion, looking at the kind of personal data that you're processing, sensitive personal data, the categories of that data, and protecting it from its life cycle. So from the creation, collection, dissemination, the use, who's viewing it, role-based access, etc., to the actual disposal and deletion. It's a full life cycle. So when I thought of this question of feasible data management and the sustainability of data management, I was trying to think, how can I think of this in a clever way? And I thought of two L's. So life cycle and lifestyle of your business.
Great. Scott, do you have anything you want to add about feasible data management?
I think try to take it up a level to the conceptual and the strategic side of it, bridging off of some of the earlier conversations. There's a lot happening in the space where the boundaries of our data systems are starting to blur quite a bit. And of course, the uses are blurred even more, right? The perimeter, as it was said, and thank you for the references to use in this session from the last. Thank you, guys. That's true, right? This perimeter of our systems that we need to protect and put our borders around as an enterprise might be somewhat still clear. But really, when we talk about the perimeter, it's not the perimeter of the company anymore, it's the perimeter of me, the individual. How do I want that information used across different systems? And so I try to think about it that way as a privacy professional. And the one thing that I tend to articulate often is that the second we throw the word privacy into the mix with security, we're not protecting systems anymore, right? We don't protect systems. Everybody out there, all of our experts that are on the phone, we don't protect systems, we protect people the second we put the word privacy in play. And so we want to keep up with consumer expectations, and that's kind of hard. Laws have certainly draw a little bit longer to understand what we need to comply with, and the controls yet even longer to come out there. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to look at other benefits that come out of data management. And there's a lot of cost savings relative to optimizing your performance, efficacy of information. And we look at the triad and we look at integrity of data. All of the values that come out of proper data management don't necessarily put privacy on the top of that tower. So I think you need to play it long and strong with your entire IT and infrastructure program. And so the stakeholdership to get involved and make sure those right decisions that are done for architecture and infrastructure at a data management layer certainly need input from privacy. They need to be a core contributor at that table, just like everybody else in your IT team and your business teams.
And I also think that companies don't need to feel like they have to boil the ocean to be able to solve this problem. So it's a problem that has to be solved step by step. You know, you do have to have a strategic plan or idea. It's not good just to start doing things. Be able to have something mapped out, what makes sense, you know, time it out correctly. And I think Scott hit the nail on the head as well as Katrina. We are dealing with human rights, or I'm sorry, in the U.S. consumer rights, other places human rights. But the fact of the matter is, you need to be able to make actionable changes that you can implement now and be able to do it in a fashion where the strategic part and also the operations align. So sometimes people, they do well at the strategy, then they don't know what to do. So it really comes down to you being able to do it. So when I look back at companies that get fined for privacy violations, it's almost always based on operationally what they could not do. So make sure that you're coming up with a plan, something that you can do. Reach out to a right professional if you feel that there's something that's outside of your scope that you can be able to do, and then go from there. All right, so let's go on to our last large point that we want to make here, which is, let me double check here. 1 second. Here we go. Did that change over for you guys?
Not yet.
Is that it? Data portability. So Scott, I would love for you to start off on data portability.
Sure. Someone that comes to us from less of a legal lens and more of a technology one. And we're working on a lot of data standards, right? Like this is where a lot of our focus is these days. And I mentioned a little bit more so than maybe needed in the last session that the sectors in the US particularly, but sectors globally have refined their data standards. And they're the right place to take a look at how you may be able to take a look at your particular use cases and address consumer rights requests, and also make sure that your collection points and your architecture can be ported from one system to another internally if you happen to change vendors or a new technology and landscape is presented to you just based on changing times and it's time for you to switch. So much effort, so much money gets poured into delayed maintenance and delayed switchovers to more cutting edge technologies. And you don't want to get caught behind the scenes on that one as an organization, as a government. So when we talk about data portability, most of the laws around privacy are really just focused on a use case of making sure that you can get that data in the hands of your consumers and do so in a way that they might be able to port it into other systems, potentially even your competitors. Completely understand that. But I think there's a bigger story that I just addressed there around portability that can help you as an enterprise prepare for the future.
Right. And then I think data portability, one other issue, so portability is sort of a big umbrella, right? So think about the fact that someone, for example, wants to revoke their consent to something. You're going to have to be able to give them, actually give them access to their data. In other countries, maybe even correct the information you have, or be able to get rid of it altogether. So portability, I think, touches on all those things in some way. So, and I think I saw a study recently that said companies struggle the most with like the right to be forgotten or being able to give people data or find data. So this is not an insignificant issue about portability and what to do with data, especially if a consumer asks for it back or revokes their consent, because there is a technology issue as well as a logistic issue that has to be worked out there, and timing. So Katrina, what's your thoughts?
Yes, well, there's so many different angles of data portability. In fact, the FTC held a really interesting conference a few weeks ago about this topic. So data portability from the consumer's standpoint, might feel that it's your data and that you would like to have access to it for whatever reason. You want to correct it, you want to delete it, like you mentioned, the right to be forgotten, or you want to port it, data portability. From the companies or the organization standpoint, so I'm only going to respond with regard to private sector organizations because the laws are a little bit different with regard to public sector organizations. But for private sector organizations, since I've been on the front line of receiving those types of requests called data subject access requests, it was impressive to me that data subjects do know rights and they're very passionate about these rights. But to first of all recognize, if you're on the receiving end of a request to port data, that it is a request to port it, that it's not a request to do something else, and that it's also a valid request. So if you receive a request to port data, to authenticate the person, but also understand that if they're requesting data that might be joint with someone else, then you are involving another person in that request. For example, a joint bank account. So you go in and you say, I would like to have my data related to this. You might need to have the consent of the other party. And that can go into other areas where there's more personal data for someone else other than the requesting party to consider. Also, responding to those requests. Now, not all organizations have to respond. If it's not a valid request, then there are ways to, or not ways, but there's a procedure that you follow. You first of all need to acknowledge the request within a certain time frame according to your jurisdiction, but then you need to inform them of why you're not going to honor that request. And if you do honor the request, then it should be in a systematic way so it's very consistent for your purposes, your processing, et cetera. And to send the information in a machine readable, usable format. We've also heard stories of making a request as a test and then receiving a file that you absolutely cannot use. So it has to be something that responds to the initial topic, which is portability. That's the purpose, is to port that data. I'd also like to add this topic is very, very rich. It is perceived differently around the world. So in the US, it's more of a competitive perception. You know, is it enabling you to get perhaps a better deal someplace else? In Europe, it's considered a little bit differently. It's belonging to the data subject. So the entity that's using it is in a sense using it for that particular purpose, but doesn't belong to that organization. So it belongs to the person. So there are different perceptions about data portability.
All right. Well, we're rolling into time now. We have about 4 minutes, and we actually have a really good question here from Kelsey. Can the panelists point to U.S. or global smart cities offering individual portability deletion rights currently? Would love to see more about what that looks like outside the consumer sector. I can just add what I know. So what I've started to see, especially with definitely with GDPR, but certainly with CCPA in the U.S., I'm starting to see states or smart cities that don't have any obligation to comply with CCPA starting to do those things. So I'm starting, I live in Illinois, so I'm starting to see government websites say, have a do not sell my data button, and they have no obligation to do that. So we are seeing people really on the technology side understanding that there has to be like a data deletion process. There has to be like a customer transparency part, and then there has to be sort of a deletion process. So even before these laws get passed in other states, we're seeing on the operational side, companies or even organizations in the private public sector preparing and actually doing these things without legislation.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a comment to that?
Well, I see that the question opened up a little bit more to also not just municipalities, but also companies that might be working good sets of policies. And I presume, Alan, you mentioned you're addressing particular data portability, because I think there's companies and there's areas and countries and states and cities that excel in different areas of their policy. Right now, we're at sort of this place where the smart cities movements are really still, okay, we've got good data practices starting in our different hubs and silos of different parts of the economy, different parts of emergency services, utilities, you name it, and they're starting to blend the data and figure out the right way to make the data talk. And they might be having some great policies on doing the right things there, but they might not have portability mastered yet. I'll give credit to a couple organizations. I know I saw Netflix out there hanging out, and in terms of portability and minimization, I know on the minimization side, just from doing some research I do in this sector, there's a great practice there where they don't collect a lot of information about you from many other sources to refine and understand a degree of personalization that they should hit you with the greatest and latest movies. Most of that stuff is all done internally, and they do a great job of it. So kudos to you guys for doing privacy well, yet still telling me the movies that I want to see. And I know there have been some challenges along the way, but it's wonderful. The other I can speak to personally from time with Nike as a for-profit, that on the portability side of it, it was really about expressing a breakdown between explicit information provided by the consumer through our experiences, observed information that is necessary to offer the services and finding a way to parse that out and put it back. And then in what's the third? Explicit, inferred, and observed. So inferred would be the last one. Information that we might render based on knowledge about you to help best serve you along the way. And so those types of inferred, explicit, observed are tracked by a number of companies now in different terminology and layers to talk about how you might be able to break which types of data are the highest of priority to port out to users, and basically lend knowledge to how you'll govern different aspects of that data, whether it's to delete it in a longer or shorter time span or make it portable for other systems. So I wish I had better specifics on particular states and countries and cities. I know Syracuse was also out there, I believe, today. They have some great stuff happening in this regard on their architecture itself. And at a global level, if people haven't looked up Estonia and what Estonia is doing, a great example of what's happening with citizens ID projects and how they've mastered some of that over the years, putting a lot into one commanding sort of program, if you will. And so it's a model to be looked at to how to at least consolidate and get things in one hub, to apply controls in one place that might stretch over all your arching municipal services.
Thank you. We're right up on our time now. I don't want anybody to get cut off, but I'm happy, all of us, to continue in the chat if people have comments or they want to comment us or contact us directly after the chat for this session. So thank you very much, Katrina. Thank you very much, Scott, for your expertise. This is a great session. Sorry, Katrina, we weren't able to get you on in time, but I feel like you were able to distill all those nuggets to us anyway. So thank you very much.
Thank
you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.